everyone, and welcome to Getting Going with Power BI. This is a recording of a fantastic session we had with Fuaad Coovadia, our expert Power BI trainer. And I just thought I'd quickly introduce myself. I'm Jimmy Winfield. I'm one of the co-founders of Skillfully. If you know anything about Skillfully, you'll know we are the home of world-class courses for high achievers in various fields, including and especially financial services. If you want the best training that South Africa has to offer, whether it's online or in person, if it's about technical skills or human skills, then you really should come straight to Skillfully. We know it's hard for an individual to find the best training experience in any particular topic. I mean, partly because, if you need the training, you don't really know the field. So how are you going to know where the best training is? What we've done is we've gone out and found the best training available in the country. If there's a large training organization that already offers a world-class course, well, then we partner with that organization and we offer that same course via them for no extra charge. But sometimes we can't find a course that is up to our extremely high standards. So we go out there and we find the best person to develop and deliver the right sort of course. And that's what's happened with Power BI. After one of our clients told us they weren't happy with the available options, imagine after our search, our delight when it revealed Fuaad Coovadia. He's a Rhodes Scholar, an expert data scientist. He's got deep experience of data science generally and Power BI in particular. He's trained many people to use it. He's cut his teeth as the head of data science at a platform with over 4 million users, and he's now using advanced data techniques in his PhD at Oxford's Business School in the UK. So he really knows what he's talking about, and we were very, very grateful that he made himself available to share his expertise with us for free in this case. I should tell you that in his spare time, he's a stand-up comedian. So you'll see that kind of come out a little bit in this recording. He has this tendency to be hilarious, even when discussing a fairly sterile but quite amazing Microsoft product. So without any further ado, why don't we jump into the very beginning of the recording where Fuaad is just getting going with Power BI.
Power BI is a data visualization software by Microsoft. And the Microsoft bit is really important here because, Microsoft are obviously the people who developed Microsoft Excel. So certainly they wouldn't be investing time and effort into this entirely different product line if it was just a simple substitute, because it's not. It's not just a replacement for Excel. In some ways, it fits very much within a value chain where Excel can be used and then Power BI can pick up from there and do some incredible things. And we'll speak about that when we go to this flow diagram. But it's also worth noting to say that Power BI serves a variety of users. It has a low barrier to entry. So after a session like this and a course like the one we're offering at Skillfully, I think that one would be able to make some pretty impressive, professional looking charts and graphs. But it also has the ability to serve people who are full-time data visualization experts because Power BI offers a range of enterprise offerings. So you can manage how many accounts you have from a your centralized data engineering perspective and a lot of fancy footwork that we don't have to go into now. So what is Power BI used for? It can be used for a variety of things. And I've just noted a couple that I've used in my work, which is reports, presentations, dashboards, and even constructing a self-service data portal. So for colleagues in my organization who aren't as close to, say, the database, a way to grab data in a self-service way. So how does Power BI fit along a sort of value chain? It first allows you to bring in data from very different sources. So it allows you to import file types that include CSVs, your spreadsheets, so the things that you may be working with already, all the way to actually databases. So if you're working with SQL or any of the cloud providers, it allows you to pull in those. And that flexibility is super useful. And just because it's a Microsoft product, it doesn't mean it's Microsoft only. You know, we were using BigQuery where I last worked, and which is a Google product, and it was pretty seamless in being able to pull some of that data directly from a Google database. So if you're using Amazon or Google BigQuery, this is perfectly suitable for you. So once you've got your data into Power BI, whatever, you know, let's take a simple example where you're just working with a spreadsheet. The next thing that Power BI allows you to do is set some rules on how to clean that data. And this is the classic thing that, you know, you're probably doing anyway. It's when you open up a spreadsheet that someone has sent you, maybe there's a column you have to rename, maybe you have to change a full stop to a comma, you know, the hours of our lives spent doing these kind of pretty automatic, mundane tasks. Power BI allows you to set almost a recipe, if you could think about it like that, so that when it sees that you've got certain ingredients coming in, it'll apply this recipe and you don't have to do it every time you load the data in. So if you're getting the same set of data, so say it's a quarterly report and, you know, every quarter it's going to look like this and it's going to have these sorts of challenges, these sorts of idiosyncrasies. You know, you set the rules once and it's able to clean that. Similar to macros, but in a much more user-friendly way. So once you've got your clean data, then you can start poking and prodding in Power BI. And I think this is one of my favorite features. It's this ability to get down into the weeds of what you're looking at. And although Excel is something that allows you to, you know, poke around at a row by row level, what this allows you to do is poke around at an overview level. Like, what am I actually looking at with this spreadsheet that I'm holding? And then finally, to take the charts and graphs that you've made and publish them. So you'll see a little button here on the top that says publish. And if we were to click that, this report would fly off to the cloud at breakneck speeds. I haven't calculated them, but I fear that they're too fast for me to handle. But the report would be in the cloud, and you can share that with your colleagues on Teams or just in a web view. So they're opening up something in a web browser that looks pretty fancy and professional. So even just on this kind of value chain, you can kind of see that, you know, the things you might be doing in Excel at the moment, or maybe if you're more advanced in Python or in R, might be these first two steps. You might be, you know, taking data in maybe that you're getting from your database or your colleagues, and you're cleaning it in some way, and you might be doing some statistics on top of it, maybe making some charts. But as we move further down this value chain, we see other things come in. You know, if you wanted to make a publishable dashboard that lives on the internet, you might have to, you know, contract a web developer to do that. And that power is now being returned into your hands. Or if you wanted a way to kind of really interrogate your data in a quick way, you may have to invest in learning something like Python or R. But Power BI, again, returns that power to your hands by offering the ability to do some of this rigorous analysis. And even this cleaning the data in a repeatable way, you know, that is the kind of stuff that, you know, Python scripts are really good for. But if you don't have the time or interest or appetite to learn that, you know, this is a really good solution that allows you to kind of fit across the value chain, have one tool that does an incredible amount. So even though I use Python in my work right now, I still find myself returning to Power BI when I get a new data set, something that I really just want to understand the shape of, something I want to visualize. And that's where I find myself. So enough talking about Power BI without showing you Power BI. I'm going to show you one use case that I use quite a bit. And this is using Power BI as a presentation tool. So the classic way of presenting data, and this data is labor force survey data. It's the field that I work in, is labor economics. And this is quarterly labor force survey. It's a survey that Stats SA releases, and it's data that we look at all the time. And the classic way of presenting this would be to do this chart in, say, Excel, export it to like a little image, and then put it in a PowerPoint slide, and then take that slide into a meeting with my manager or my colleagues. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't give a sense of the data to who you're talking to. It doesn't allow you to do dynamic things. And let me show you what you could do with this, which is, you know, we're looking at this chart and graph, and I've clearly made some decisions on this bar chart to say, show me the percentage of how many people are in each category. But someone might also be interested in the raw numbers, and that might look a little bit cluttered if it was just a static 2D graph. But with Power BI, I can do this thing called tooltips, where all of a sudden there's this dynamic capability where when I scroll over this bar, I can see that actually there's 16 million people who fit into this employed category, or there are 3 million people who fit into this discouraged job seeker category. Furthermore, and hold on to your hats, folks, because this is the point in the presentation where a lot of hats get lost, which is if we want to ask questions in the presentation, say we want to probe and think about things live with our colleagues, we can do something like this, which is to say we're looking at the distribution for the entire South African population, but what if we just want to look at it for youth? So now we have the ability to add like dynamic filtering into the presentation itself, where now we can see that some of these bar charts moved. So, if I could toggle back to the non-youth, there's far more employed people than in any of the other individual categories. But when we look at youth, there's a lot of people who are not economically active for various reasons. But that ability to kind of be able to kind of poke and prod at the data, not only does it make for a more interesting dynamic presentation, but it also provides more confidence in the underlying numbers. The ability to go into the data that you're looking at and poke around with it, for me at least, it's led to moments where my manager will ask me, oh, are we really sure about that number? How does it look in the Western Cape versus Gauteng? And having the data right here with me allows me to kind of reshape this graph, look at the underlying numbers very quickly, live in the meeting. We can even work out some new graphics that save a lot of time and also help me as the person working with the data have more confidence in the numbers I'm showing. So the second thing that one can do, besides just using it as a slide deck, is build dashboards, professional dashboards that can live on the internet. As I mentioned, this is the kind of thing that in the past you might have had to do a request for proposals and, send it out for tender to a web developer, and you're never going to see them again. And, your whole life could be ruined by a web developer. And I think if there's one takeaway message, it's that marriages and lives have been ruined by web developers worldwide. And I'm here to say that you don't have to go down that dangerous path. You have the ability to make professional looking dashboards. And what makes this a dashboard rather than just a static image is, again, the ability to interact with some of the visuals. So like last time, we're looking at the quarterly labor force survey from Stats SA, and this is showing that out of the estimated 60 million people in South Africa, these are some of the distributions. So one question we may have about this distribution is, of the people who are employed, where do they work? And we may think that, you can break that down, first of all, by, how many people work in the formal sector, the informal sector, or for private households. If you work in the formal sector, what industry are you working in? Okay, there's a lot of people in financial intermediation, insurance, real estate, business services. There's some people in wholesale and trade. Let's see, for people in finance, what are the main occupations? Well, there's a bunch of people lumped into this QLFS category of service workers and shop and market sales workers. If we then wanted to change track and explore private households, we could see that, there's almost 900,000 domestic workers, which is, a very large amount. So just in the span of just playing with this for about 30 seconds, this dynamic dashboard graph has given me a way to explore in a way that answers my own questions about the South African economy, what it looks like from an overview level. This is something that may have taken, a couple of slides, a couple of charts, some considered thinking, but giving the power to whoever your users are to actually look at this data and explore it themselves. Not only does it give them confidence, like we spoke about earlier, about trying to understand some of these questions for themselves by poking around in it, but it also saves you time, because instead of having to kind of present 50 different charts and graphs about the economy, you've now got a dashboard up that people can visit when they need the numbers. The second thing that makes this interesting is the ability to kind of dynamically filter. So like the last thing I showed you, if we only wanted to understand what some of these overview numbers look like for the manufacturing industry, for example, then we could filter it by that. And then we see that, okay, private households have fallen away. No one works for manufacturing inside of a private household. Thank goodness. And you can see the overall numbers also changed. So this kind of dynamic movement of your graphs also enable kind of exploration in ways that you as the graph designer may not have anticipated. One example of this is we might want to know how many people work for government out of these 16 million. And if we click here, we see that government employs about 2.5 million people. And mostly in the informal sector, although they have some contracts. So in a moment, we went through a live working dashboard that honestly took an hour to make yesterday. So this is the kind of thing that I think you can whip up, and we'll be going more into kind of the design elements of it in the full course. But what we want to show you now is just how it looks and what you could do with Power BI if you're interested. So I think at this moment in time, I've definitely spoken a lot, and I'd be interested in knowing, what are the things that come to mind for you that show how you may use this. There's other ways in which, people from other industries use it. Fact sheets could be automated, for example, by having the graph and then having the data come in and those cleaning procedures working on the same data set. There's other use cases in terms of report writing. So I'm just going to check the chat, but I'd be interested for you to note down in the chat, if there's a way in which you see this working in your organization, just let me know. I see a question from Adele here, which is, can Power BI slides be pulled into PowerPoint, keeping the dynamic functionality? That's a great question. And you're totally right, Adele, it can be. So when you hit publish, where this ends up going into is it goes in onto the web. And from there, you have an ability to do a couple of things. You can share it as a website, like I said, but you can also download it specifically in PowerPoint form. And that's the good thing about Power BI being within the Microsoft family, is that it allows you to download it specifically as a slide deck. And so then you can pull in other slides that you might not want to, you might not want to present like I'm doing now from the actual tool itself. So for sure you can. It's a great question. Storm, definitely the ability to drill into the raw data, that is, a huge use case. And I think we'll look at some of that now. One kind of example of that is, on each of the graphics you make, they each have the ability to actually, to zoom into the graphic itself. And some of the things you can do to drill into some of this data is you can add layers to it. So, we could add a different layer under, occupation, for example, that allows us to look at the gender breakdown in that specifically, for example, or we can show the data as a table. So, you can just get an idea of, what these breakdowns are by just eyeballing it, drilling down into some of these categories. So yeah, absolutely. The ability to work through levels of the data and drill down into things that, maybe this business unit only cares about something and drilling down into what they need. That's definitely a use case. Cool. Oh, and Sheetal, you want to use this in terms of, the reports that have been built for you and you want to know how to navigate it. I think that's definitely a large use case that a lot of people have. That's how I got into it with that colleague, is they were using Power BI and I needed to understand, how does it work? And I think it's good that you're investing time in learning it, even if you're just a consumer of Power BI, because I think, someone sending you something like this, especially if they haven't spent a lot of time thinking through the design elements, it can be a bit clunky in terms of a lot of information, a lot of things to click. So even as just a consumer of Power BI, it's definitely worth knowing what is going on. So for example, if you were a consumer of Power BI and you were sent something like this, and you clicked on one of the filters, in this case, private enterprise, and you saw this number change, it's useful for you to know what is actually going on in the background to understand why this number is changing. And at a high level, what is going on is, you could imagine you have a spreadsheet. In this case, each row is one of our 60 million people. And when we click on anything in the Power BI report, whether it's a filter explicitly or whether it's one of these, we clicked on a bar that says female, what's going on in the background in Power BI is that it's looking through that spreadsheet and it's just filtering for only the things that meet that criteria of female. So it's looking in the column gender, in this case, you see it there, and it's saying only return back to the rows where gender is true. And that's why we get this 30 million estimate. And that sort of logic applies for everything that you click on. So if I click on electricity, gas, and water supply, it's now filtering those 60 million rows to only find the things where electricity, gas, and water supply is true. That may be a bit more in the details of it, but I couldn't resist just trying to answer some of your question. Adele, in your question about InDesign, I don't think that it has the ability to export into, this is Adobe InDesign, I'm imagining. I don't think so, but I'm not sure. There are also interesting workarounds that people have developed to work with some of these kind of graphic design software. So, for example, some of what you're seeing now, the blue background image and getting the shadows is a background that I've imported from a file that I made on Figma. So working with some of these design tools is some of the more complex, interesting things you can do with design. But exporting it into an InDesign file, I haven't heard of that, so I'm not sure. Cool. So if that's it for the questions for now, there's one more thing I want to mention, and then we're going to actually get started in building one of these reports for the time we have remaining. So the one thing I need to mention before we dive into it is that the use of Power BI depends on what laptop or computer you have. And this may seem very mundane to mention, but honestly, a lot of people get stuck in their Power BI journey just at this point. I definitely did, is that it's a little bit confusing in terms of what Microsoft have released. So they've released two things. They've released Power BI Desktop, which is a desktop application, the one that we're sitting in right now. So it's something that, I've downloaded to my computer, I open up, and this is really the thing that you use to make the reports. It has the full functionality to like create charts and graphs, to clean your data, etc. There's also something they've released called the Power BI service, or Power BI in the browser. And this is if you go onto the web, if you open up a browser, certainly if you've been sent the report that a colleague has created for you, you'll probably open it up into this browser, the Power BI in the browser. And what Power BI in the browser is it's more the kind of the home page. It's like, you can think about it as like, what SharePoint is. It's where you see the reports. It does go beyond that, in that it allows you to create reports. So for Apple users, the Power BI desktop is not available. And Power BI in the browser is what you will be kind of limited to. However, that being said, the direction that Power BI seems to be taking as a product from Microsoft is that they keep releasing features for the browser versions that make it easier and easier to make things happen in the browser. So a couple of years ago when I was using it, it was incredibly limited, and they've added on incredible features that mean that you have the ability to make some very impressive dynamic interactive graphs like the ones we've been looking at purely in the browser. But that's just to mention. So if you're on Mac, you will be looking at Power BI in the browser. So you can go online and go app.powerbi.com. But if you are on Windows, you'll need to go into your Microsoft Store and you'll need to download Power BI Desktop specifically. Cool. It sounds so lame to mention this, but honestly, it is one of these things it's like a nuance that gets people into a corner. But now we can move on to the stuff we really want to talk about, which is, starting from a blank page. How do I get going with nothing? And this is the blank canvas that you would be faced with if you were ever to kind of download Power BI and open it up for the first time. So it's worth taking a moment just to orient ourselves and look at where we are. I'm just going to pull that down. So this middle bit here is your canvas. This is where your graphs are going to go. It's where your charts are going to go. You can add stuff to it. So it can add a text box. And this is the kind of dimensions of the page you're working with. So this is our page. From here, you have this toolbar where you have the ability to bring in some of your data. So this is where we can get started on importing some of our data. We then also have the ability to kind of edit some of that data in a way that is similar to Excel. And then we have the ability to then build on top of that. So this toolbar is very useful at the top here. And as you can see, because it's a Microsoft product, it fits into this very familiar kind of visual grammar of what the products are like. The other thing to mention is these three kind of panes here. So let's click the data one first. This data one is where your data, when you load it, where it lives. And although this is a blank page, I've already loaded data for some of these other pages. That was the quarterly labor force survey data that we were looking at now. And this is that data set, and each of the columns in that data set has come in as an individual element that we can click. This, by the way, this is a real overview of some of these features that, if you really wanted to dig into them, they would each take, a session in themselves, and in a full course, I would go into a lot more detail. But just to orientate yourself, we've got this and also a cheat sheet, which covers orientating yourself around this main screen. The next pane that's of interest is visualizations. And this is where you choose the kinds of graphs you wanted. So do you want a horizontal bar chart? Do you want a pie chart? Do you want something more interesting like a map? And this is where you choose that, and you would like fine tune what your chart or graph is actually trying to do. The last thing is filters. So if you wanted to create a chart and you wanted to filter it only for females, you could add a filter that says only for females. So similar to the dynamic filtering we were looking at earlier, this is a way for you to filter a chart from the get-go. Say, I know that my audience is only interested in manufacturing, and I don't need them to kind of click to that when I present a report. This is how you do it. But let's close that and get back to basics, which is importing a new data set. So I'm just going to delete this fused. And so we've got our blank page again. So I'm going to import something from Excel. So I'm going to click Get Data, and Excel is right here, and it's up here very nicely. But I'm just going to go more to show you the range of things you can import data from. They've got the basic things that I think most of us would be working with. But if you're working with some enterprise software, say you're working with data that you're pulling in from Google Analytics or Salesforce, you can import that directly through some custom imports here. But for our purposes, let's just go to Excel, and I'm going to pull in an Excel file, which is with financial information. So this is, let's see, okay, it's just in use. Let me just close that. So it's fund information, and you'll see it open now. So when you click import, it will open up this navigator screen where it's got this Excel. And if it had multiple sheets, you can see all of those sheets. This one only has one called daily prices. And it's a fund sheet that it actually exists in the world. I downloaded, about 10 days worth of data yesterday, but anonymized it. And so you'll see Fund A's prices are here, Fund B's prices are here, and we can see that over time. You may also notice that in classic Excel style, if you've ever downloaded one of these fund sheets from the web, they don't come automatically ready for you to use. Sometimes they'll have, maybe a little bit of company information at the top and a couple of rows, and then it's got the fund information. So we know that maybe there's a little bit of cleaning to do. And in Excel, if you were there, maybe you would have deleted these top two rows. But let's see how Power BI handles it. So we're going to go and click Transform Data, because we know that we have to do a little bit of cleaning. And what's going to happen now is it's going to open up a window, which is the kind of kitchen of Power BI. And I just want to make sure everyone can see this. Can you see a new window that has opened up? Okay, it says my screen sharing is paused. So let me actually just reshare, because this is the point where it's a different window entirely. So just the screen itself. Great. Okay. Now everyone should be seeing the actual, okay, thank you, Sharif. I hope the new window is up now.
Yeah, Fuad, I've unmuted just to confirm that what we're seeing there is, it looks like it's inside the Power BI desktop app, and we're seeing 3 columns of information.
That's perfect. That's exactly it. So we'll see that here's the new thing we brought in, the Excel called daily prices, and we're seeing the new columns that we loaded. The thing I want to draw your attention to is this thing on the right-hand side called applied steps. And this is what I was speaking about earlier. This is the real magic of it. This is the thing that keeps me using Power BI. And it's the ability to store these kind of cleaning steps so that every time I download a fund sheet from the web, I don't have to redo some of this base stuff. I can just load it in here. So what do I mean by that? Well, for example, the first two things we want to do is, or the first thing we want to do is remove these first 2 rows. So for that, we're going to click on one of these columns, and we're going to filter out these things that say null. Like we don't need the null rows. We just need the rows where there's an actual date. So I'm going to say OK, and you'll see that it filtered all the null rows. But it also added a new step here that said filtered rows. So that is saved as like an operation. That if I had to come in with new data, it would go through that pipeline and filter that automatically. Another thing we want to do is use this first row as the actual headers. These are not data, these are the names of the column. So I'm going to just click this button called use first row as headers. It's a common operation that a lot of people do, and they have stored procedures for some of those things. And it has moved that to the top, and it has also added a step called promoted headers. And it's also added an automatic step because it's recognized that, okay, now that you're telling me that those things are headers, I'm looking at the data and all of this looks pretty similar. Some of these look like numbers and some of these look like dates. And so Power BI has automatically changed the type of your data, how it's recognizing that data for some of it to be numbers and some of it to be dates. And we can change that ourselves. Say if we thought, oh, this isn't actually a number, it's text. We can add a new step that says, okay, we're going to change that back to text. But that wouldn't be correct. So I'm going to just remove that step. And you can go back through the history of steps here to see what it looked like before and to what it looks like now. And so if a colleague is sending you a Power BI, and this is for the question earlier for, I think it was Sheetal, who said, there's people who are creating Power BIs that you're consuming. This is something that's super useful for you from a consumer perspective, is to actually open up their Power BI and see what cleaning and data transformations they've actually applied. Because, when you get an Excel, you don't know what kind of devious kind of alterations or changes someone has made to that pure data. They could be adding zeros, they could be taking off ones, who knows? But with this, it's very legible, it's very traceable. If there's a problem, it's easy to come back and follow a sort of audit trail. Anyways, that being said, there's one more thing I'd like to do with this data, which is at the moment, we see that all of our information are in columns, which, Fund A has all its prices here, Fund B has all its prices here. One easier way to work with this data is if we pivot it, and we don't have time to explain the full logic of it now, but you have to take my word that this will, or to unpivot it, this will make it much easier to work with, and I'll go through this in the course. But this is one of these data hacks that, the difference between having your information with each fund being a column and each fund having an attribute in a row is chef's kiss, all the difference. I'm just going to rename this to price so we know what we're talking about. This can say attribute and this can say date. Cool, so we're ready to go. And so we're going to exit out of this view. This was really the kind of kitchen of Power BI. This is where you're looking at the underlying data. We're going to say close and apply, and we're going to go back to our main screen that we had been looking at before. So it's loaded the data, and I'm going to go back to data, and yep, lo and behold, next to the thing that we had loaded, now we have a new thing called daily prices. And if I toggle that down, we see the 3 columns that we had for daily prices loaded in here. So let's open up this visualizations pane so we can start working with this data. Now, the first thing that I do when I have a new data set and I highly recommend this as a kind of best practice, is before trying to make a bar chart or something fancy, just go for an ordinary table. Just make sure that your data that you're looking at is as you expect. So, and then you can do fancy things on top of that. So let's load in some of our data. So one thing I'm going to do here is I just clicked attribute, and it knew that because this was the table I had selected, we're going to load that in there. Another way of doing it is if I drag attribute down into this thing called columns. And you'll see now it's added it as a column. And this will be useful when we have to do more fancy graphs where things need to be in the x-axis or the y-axis. This will be very useful. But for now, let's just drag all of these as columns. So we've got the attribute. Let's drag in the price. Okay, it's done something interesting now with price, which is you'll see that it says sum of price automatically. So this is one of the quick ways in which Power BI allows you to get started, which is it does calculations over some of the fields. So if we click on this drop-down menu, we see the options of calculations it's given us. So it's gone automatically for sum. So that's the sum of the prices over all of the days of the fund, which doesn't make too much sense. Maybe we'd be happier with something like the average. Or maybe we just want to see all the raw data itself. So all of the prices for all of the days with no calculation added. So this would be similar to our spreadsheet view. And maybe that is what we want. So let's also drag in the date here. And it's added a couple of columns here because it's recognized, because Power BI knows it's working with a date, it has then done a very clever thing of, separating out year, month, day, but we don't necessarily need that for now. So I'm just going to click date. So we're back to our basic table, which looks correct. It looks like it's got our fund. So here's fund A, here's all of the dates for fund A, and here's the prices. To make the point about filtering that we had earlier, I'm just going to open up that filter pane, and you'll see it already has attribute here. And if I just wanted to only show the prices for fund A, I could do it like that. Similarly, I could select all, and maybe all we're interested in is the last day. So I could go and find the 11th of March. Power BI also has some smart filtering capabilities where you could say relative day. So say I only want values from the last 5 days. So this is the kind of feature which allows you to make dynamic tables. So if you were a fund manager, for example, and you knew that every Monday you have to wake up and show the last week's worth of prices, you could just set this as a dynamic thing. And every Monday, you know that when you wake up, it's calculating backwards from that Monday. So let's say the last 1 week. Cool. So that's some of the features on a table. Let's clear that filter and let's move the price back to the average price so we can see it nicely for each fund, and we'll take away the date. So not just the average price for each fund over all of the dates that we have. Another thing that you can do from here is then now you can move over to charts and graphs. And the way Power BI works is that it allows you to switch between charts and graphs very easily to see which one may suit you. So I'm going to make a copy of this table that we have just by Control-C, Control-V, the way you would copy and paste in Word or Excel. And I'm going to take this table and I'm going to say, what would this table look like if I made it a bar chart? And just click it. And now we have ready-made a bar chart directly from this table. And from here, we can start looking at things. And it's already got some of these automated attributes attached to it. It automatically will have these kind of tooltips that I showed you earlier. It automatically has the filtering. So you see when I click Fund E over here, it dynamically filters it for another chart separately on the page. So those things are defaults. These are not necessarily things that can't be changed if you don't want it, but at a base level, Power BI within a minute has already set up the ability to do some pretty sophisticated interactions between your data. So here we've got a bar chart of our fund prices, and we can leave that there. I think a question we may have is, how do we make this into a line chart? We might want to visualize our prices over time. So here, let's start a new chart. Let's click line chart, and it has opened up a blank canvas for a line chart. And on that blank canvas, I want to draw our attention now to these empty fields below the visualization pane. These empty fields is where we need to drag our data. And so this makes it easy for us visually to think, okay, what should be our x-axis and our y-axis? Our x-axis, if we want a line chart over time, should be the date. So let's drag the date in there. And again, let's just switch this to dates rather than a date hierarchy. And what do we want on our y-axis? Well, we want the price. So let's drag our price in there. And it's automatically generated something. So that goes from the first date we have on the 12th of February to the 11th of March. So over this month-long period, it's giving us the sum of the price for all of the funds. Now, that might also not be what we're interested in. We're looking for the average. But this is still now the average of the fund, the price over all of the funds. So what's one way we could correct this? Well, one way is we could use our dynamic filtering. So we could make this the kind of thing where we click one of these funds at a time, and it changes this line graph below. So you're using this almost as like a button selector to see which fund you're interested in at a certain moment in time. Fund I is looking good. If anyone asks, Fund I is where I'd put my money. Alternatively, what you can do is on the same graph itself, you can add a legend. So when I say add a legend, I don't mean Jimmy. I mean add a legend as in these attributes. So the different funds we have. So now each of the funds is showing up as its own line. Now that doesn't look too good because I think the prices are completely different scales. So we may similarly still need to filter this to one or two comparable line graphs. So maybe let's see, maybe Fund A and Fund C look like in comparable regions. So let's filter just by those two. Okay, so now we get some variation within these graphs, but you're still not seeing the full fund potential. So let me show you one or two last things that can, kind of customize these graphs and allow me to, present this in meetings to colleagues and stuff in quite a dynamic way. So I've gone here to this visualizations pane, and I'm going here to format. And under format, you have all of these options of how you want your graph to look. So if we wanted to add data labels, for example, so that there's numbers on at different points on our graph. If we wanted to add a background to our graph, maybe make it a different color. If we wanted to take away these grid lines or add the grid lines, the little dotted lines, we could change our legend, change our title of the graph. One thing I want to show you is a zoom slider. And so what this zoom slider allows you to do is it's a sort of drill down for line graphs or for continuous functions. And what it enables you to do is, here we can see, okay, there's some variation, but we're losing track of the picture of the fund because they're just operating on different scales. So let's say we're only interested in Fund A. Let's kind of change the scale of this y-axis to just zoom in on what's going on with Fund A. So if we look just between the region of 18,000 and 19,000 USD, what's going on with this fund? And similarly, we can do that for our lower one too. So this is the kind of stuff that, at least for me, in investigating what's going on in the data, this stuff is super useful. It feels like being a real detective. And let's say, okay, we're actually only interested in knowing what's going on in February. Similarly, we can zoom scroll just for what's happening during that month and set that there. We can leave that there as the default or allow our users to kind of access it themselves. I think I'm going to be wrapping up soon, but I think just before I go, there's just one or two other things I want to say about like this basic chart creation thing. But if you have a couple of questions, this would be the moment to just drop them in the chat. Otherwise, we can connect on perhaps a full course where we'll have time to dive into more of these. The one last thing I was going to mention about this line chart is, now I'm thinking about what it was. Oh yes, it was showing you that this information can also similarly be seen as a table. So if I go to focus mode, I can look at this chart as we made it. But if I want to understand the data while I'm looking at the chart, I can also pull up this table mode. So by more options, and I said view as table. And now I'm looking at the same data, but in a table mode. Cool. Just going to check the chat. Okay. There are no questions. So I'm going to use the 2 minutes I have left to tackle a question from earlier, or rather a suggestion that came up from, so let's check who it was. It was the person who said they would use this for drill downs. Stormsmith. What a memorable name. I can't believe I forgot that. So Storm drill downs are one of the things I definitely use this for a lot. And so let me show you one way in which, if we had kept that date hierarchy, we could have done a drill down. So very quickly, let me take away date. And let me switch off the zoom slider so it's a little bit easier to see. And let's pull in this date as it's loaded automatically by Power BI. So it's got now a date hierarchy. It's got this automatic drill down feature where, because it knows our data is as a hierarchy, it starts all the way from year, and all of our data is in 2024. So maybe we want to drill down one step lower than that. So let's go, okay, now it's got the average for each month. So here's the average for Feb, and here's the average for March. We can drill down into one lower than that. So here's the month as a line, and then we can drill down to the day. So the last drill down, if we click it again, it goes down into the day. So that is one way in which drill down can be used, is on the same chart itself, you can move down to these different layers. But that was definitely something that is worth spending more time on. I just wanted to visually show that it is possible to drill down into different layers. So with that, folks, I hope that what you have at the end of this is a basic view of what Power BI can do, where it may fit into your work stream, and also some ability to navigate, some ability to open up Power BI yourself and not be intimidated by some of this navigation. If you want to learn more, I could, as you can see, go on about this for hours. So I will leave it there. But there's certainly a lot more under the hood that we could get into. But let me leave it there and hand over back to Jimmy. Thank you.
Geez, thanks, Fuaad. You certainly achieved those goals. You packed so much into this hour, and it feels like it has flown by for me. At one point, you warned us to hold on to our hats, but mine just kept flying off nonetheless. I think I probably speak for everyone here when I say that you've convinced us that Power BI is a very powerful and attractive tool that can clean our data super efficiently and reveal insights hidden in our data that we might not get in other ways, and also really ramp up the quality and the look and the feel and the interactivity of our presentations and reports, and impress our colleagues and bosses. I think you've also helped me see that Power BI is much less scary and complex than I kind of feared it was. So thanks so much for that. That brings me to the question that some people might be wondering, which is, what's the next step? Well, of course, it's to sign up for Fuaad's course, Power BI for Beginners. It's a much deeper dive into Power BI, where over 6 hours, you and your team will have a chance to follow along on your own computer and come out with everything you need to use Power BI with confidence. Imagine what you could learn from Fuaad in 6 times the amount of time that we had with him this morning. The model we've got is flexible, but it typically consists of 2 3-hour sessions, 1 week apart, which gives you a chance after the first session to try new things and work out what questions you have before the next session. Usually we offer the course to teams of about 10 or more people, but if we have enough interest from individuals, let's say 10 of you tell us that you'd like to take Power BI for Beginners, then we'll run a public course for you. Maybe I should quickly show you how to use the Skillfully platform to find out more. So here is the Skillfully page. Should be shared now. And very easy, skillfully, ll.coza. And here we go. We can still see getting going with Power BI. Anybody who tries to book that now will be disappointed. We'll be taking it down in a few minutes. But there are lots and lots of courses, CFA courses, lots of regulatorily required courses. We found the best in the industry. Other human skills courses, Enneagram, some of you were with us last week, media training and presentation and management and all sorts of stuff. But if you're interested in the Power BI for beginners, here it is. You can also use the filter up here just to quickly look for it. And there it is there. And then if you click on this page, you can find out a whole bunch more information. There's a great PDF download that actually gives you the exact details of what's available. If you want to book it, you just click book now. If you're not sure you want to book, but you want to find out more, click contact me. At any point, if you like, you can click the ask a question tool over here and just shoot us a question. We're happy to answer whatever questions you have. Okay, well, that's it. Thanks so much for watching. If you are interested, you now know all of the different ways in which you can communicate with us. We'd love to hear from you. We often say that we might look like a tech platform, but we're actually a relationships business. So we're waiting to hear from you, and we'd love to set you up in your quest to improve your Power BI skills. Cheers for now.